In part 3 of this video series, we discover the wonders of Capitol Reef. Afterwards, we travel off the normal map and roads to visit Factory Butte, the Moon Overlook, and the Mars Desert Research Station. Then off to Arches National Park, with a lunch stop at Goblin Valley State Park. The next day we visit Canyonlands and Arches National Parks, but events leave us in Moab for the end of this part of the journey. Capitol Reef National Park comprises perhaps the best known of the geologic stairs, the Water Pocket Fold, that is dissected by the Fairmont River. In this protected oasis arose the town of Fruita, whose population declined in the 20th century with the last Mormon settlers turning their historic town into part of the national park. The name Fruita refers to the huge fruit orchards the settlers planted there, and the campground is nestled inside the orchards. You are allowed to pick and eat any fruit in season while in the orchard, where you share with the rather tame deer feasting on apples and other fruit. You are asked to pay if you carry fruit away, as we did, getting apples we could eat for several days. Capitol Reef was also undergoing massive repairs, so the scenic drive and many parking lots were closed, making for a parking nightmare. Since we could not drive, we decided to hike to the top to see the Water Pocket Fold. The hike was about 2 miles along the river, but then a narrow and steep incline up for almost a mile. Finally approaching the summit, the reward was well worth the strenuous hike. The view looking down into the Fruita orchards and campground with the fold looming behind was breathtaking. We hiked the 3 miles back down to the campground, and were rewarded with a stop at the Guilford House, one of the few remaining historic houses of Fruita. It is now a gift shop, but in harvest season, they make fresh homemade pies from the fruit of the local orchards. A worthy reward for all our exercise. Capitol Reef is another dark sky park, and even has nighttime astronomy programs. We were lucky to be there to capture the partial lunar eclipse rising over the Water Pocket Fold. The next morning we awoke early to hike back to the Hickman Bridge. You first make a steep ascent where you can see the signature rock formation of the park that looks like the Capitol Dome. You then have to hike back a couple of miles, some of it a little steep, past a small arch, until you see the looming Hickman Bridge arch. The arch is huge, with a span of over 130 feet, and is named after Joseph Hickman, considered one of the fathers of the park. He first opened the area to the public with the name Wayne's Wonderland. The park is in Wayne County, in 1921. Yes, Capitol Reef is the original Wayne's World. Returning down to the parking lot, we appreciated our early start, as the crowds arriving filled every available place to park. A short drive away was a wonderful boardwalk built to view another wall panel of petroglyphs. In the late afternoon, we visited the hiking area around what is known as Chimney Rock, then to the Gooseneck Trail to see the deep cuts of the meandering Fremont River curving tightly through the fold. We ended the day hiking back to Sunset Point. It was simply breathtaking, and a worthy end to an amazing visit to Capitol Reef. Early the next morning, well before dawn, we broke camp and drove in the darkness out of the park and into Bureau of Land Management land, traveling in the dark on dirt and gravel roads to get to what is called the Moon Overlook for sunrise. Perhaps one of the most otherworldly sights, sunrise there is beyond description. It is a photographer's dream. It is also famous in the Instagram crowd for having your photo taken on this rock outcrop at sunrise. It is dangerous, and at least one person has fallen to their death in a quest for Instagram fame. We could look back at the factory butte we passed on our way in, glowing in the rising sun. Now for the truth behind the photos. The road in, called Coal Mine Road, is not really a road, more of a set of ruts going overland. We drove our 11,000-pound RV in the dark over this horrible road and dipped into a dry riverbed. The Echo rocked and almost tipped over. Everything not nailed down went flying around the inside of the vehicle, and we heard a horrible grinding sound. When we stopped, we gathered all the shoes, kitchen and camera gear into piles and surveyed the damage. We had bent the retractable stairs in the Echo. Luckily they could still retract, and we had insurance, but we were much more careful on the BLM roads from that point. Not learning our lesson, we took the next BLM road with the best name ever out to the privately funded Mars Desert Research Station. Situated in the Bentonite Hills below where we viewed from the Moon Overlook, they simulate long-duration stays on Mars. You cannot approach the site, and they tell you if the astronauts are out doing experiments, not to wave at them. We refueled and stocked up in Hicksville, then continued north, stopping at the wonderful Goblin Valley State Park for lunch. The short, squat hoodoos earned the name goblins. We arrived at Arches National Park in the afternoon and headed to the far end of the park, to the Devil's Garden campground. We hiked back in the late afternoon to the largest freestanding arch, the Landscape Arch, and watched the sunset on the Skyline Arch, which was directly behind our campsite. The nights were back being hot, so we enjoyed the dark sky, then our air-conditioned RV. Another early morning and 90-minute drive in the dark took us to Canyonlands National Park to witness the sunrise over Mesa Arch. The position and shape of the arch reflects the rising sun, its underside glowing. Another photographer's dream. We were able to even get a photo of the two of us taken by one of the hundreds of other people and photographers that cram into the space in the dark, all wanting that special sunrise photo. Canyonlands is huge, but we visited only the islands and the sky section. It is a narrow butte sticking out, surrounded by steep canyons on both sides. At one section, it is so narrow that the canyons drop from both sides of the road. The Mormon settlers and gold miners built the Schaefer Trail that snakes down the steep cliffs to the Colorado River. It is maintained today, and those brave or stupid enough with 4x4 vehicles can drive it. We left the park and took the Potash Road, where the Schaefer Trail exits. The steep canyon walls go right to the Colorado River, and we stopped for one last petroglyph panel, with a famous depiction that looks like paper doll cutouts. Being Friday, we stopped on the way back to Arches for our traditional pizza and beer. We returned to Arches in the afternoon to discover that even with the new timed entry system, the park was still overcrowded, taking us almost an hour to re-enter. We toured all the famous arches and sites, the double arch, the dueling window arches, the turret arch, the standing rock, and ended our day with the crowd watching sunset at the most famous arch, the delicate arch. We returned to our campsite for another hot evening to have all power shut off in the Echo. There is no cell service in the park, but we were able to drive the RV to Moab, where we called the company to discover we had accidentally left the solar inverter on for the last 4 days without plugging in the RV. We had depleted the batteries. They talked us through resetting them, but without an electrical connection we would have to drive for at least 3 hours to charge them. Being late at night, we took refuge in a local Marriott.